CZ Media Podcast is brought to you by Rancho Bravos Tacos. They make it really easy to get great tasting Mexican food. You can stop by any one of their 3 convenient locations, Capitol Hill, U District, Wallingford, or you can order through Uber Eats, Caviar, or Chow Now. You can also text RBT to the number 474747, and you'll get deals on tacos, burritos, and more. All of the information is in the show notes. Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Before we start, I'm just going to go ahead and say subscribe to the show, iTunes, Stitcher, or the website. Like it, share it, give us feedback, send me topics, send me suggestions of people who you think are Seattle centric and would want to have their message shared with a lot of people. Like lots of people, not maybe hundreds of thousands yet, but enough people. Send me an email to czmediapodcast@gmail.com. And today, well, you know what? Before we talk about what we're going to talk about today, did you watch the Oscars?
Yes.
The whole thing?
Yes, I did.
I heard that it was a lot. Was it shorter?
It was a bit shorter because there was no host.
Oh. So what do they do?
They had a lot of performances, and the presenters basically were kind of like the hosts. They would come up and say
it's like a
things
variety show.
Yeah. The Amy Poehler, Tina Fey, and
Didn't they host it one year?
they did. And Maya Rudolph, the 3 of them presented early on, and they were fabulous.
What was I doing? I think I was editing taco pictures. I was too busy to watch it. But I did sneak a peek when the Best Song Award was announced, because I've had that Star is Born soundtrack on repeat for weeks now. I don't know why I really like it.
Did you? So you didn't see the performance?
I didn't see I haven't seen it yet, and it's been on my recommended iTunes or YouTube list, but I haven't seen it yet.
You should watch it. You'll watch that on repeat also.
Will it make me man cry?
Perhaps.
I'll when I've had a few glasses of wine and just sitting there watching YouTube, I'll admit. But I do have a star on the show right now, the Seattle attorney. Are there awards for attorneys?
There are different kinds of awards.
Like for awesomeness?
Well,
they have to be for specific things, I assume.
Be things for, professionalism, pro bono awards, things like that.
Well, I have my guest today is Stacy Heard. Hi, Stacy.
Hi, Carlos. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad you took time to come and chat with me. We're going to talk about something a little heavy, in the words of Marty McFly. That's a great way to describe this. And I met Stacy a few weeks ago, and she's like, I'm a family law attorney. And then I'm like, hey, if I had a better family law attorney years ago, I think I would have done way better when I got divorced. So then we just started chatting. And I'm like, you know what? A lot of this information that you're sharing with me, I think that a lot of people would find useful and maybe might help avoid some problems, or at least, going into this whole process with as much information as possible. So I'm glad that you took some time to come and chat with me. So tell us a little bit about your background and why you decided to become an attorney.
I was interested in the law mainly because I am insatiably curious, and I like learning new things all the time. So the law provides that, in that, that you're doing research, you're trying to apply this research to certain facts of cases, things like that. So it's definitely not boring, and it is very intellectually stimulating.
You have to be mega curious.
Well, for me, that's part of why I like being a lawyer.
And
I also really wanted to be able to help people.
yeah.
And as a lawyer, even if you're not practicing law, there are so many other careers you can have that a law degree will provide you a good background to.
Like a sports agent.
Correct.
I wanted to be a sports agent for a while. And I thought if I am a sports agent, I need to go to law school. But then my athletes sort of died out.
Right.
And
There are always more that come along, but yes.
Yeah,
and
that's so hard though.
It is a tough field, and there are, it's a tough market right now for finding work for lawyers, and it's expensive to go to law school. So those are all things that everybody who's considering it needs to.
Isn't there I don't want to call it a law, but isn't there a program in Washington State where you can help people without having a degree?
There is the limited license legal technician, which is a recent title that was approved by the state. And these people they're more than a paralegal, but they're less than an attorney. And they can provide assistance to people completing mandatory forms and things like that.
Well, what we're going to talk about today is what Stacy's specialty is, which is divorce and much more than that. But before we start talking about it, I have to say, so would this be legalese, as they say, that we're having a general conversation? It isn't meant to substitute for legal advice. And I'm probably just going to end up talking about how I got screwed. Because I may be a tad bit bitter. So does that work?
That
Stacey?
works. And if this is Carlos therapy, then this is Carlos therapy.
Well, I mean, as much as I try to not put, it's human nature.
I also think it's helpful for listeners to have an example or a hypothetical to talk about, because it makes the conversation and the information I'm sharing, it makes it real.
Well, knowing me, I'll probably spin it a lot towards just me. So reel me in if you have to.
Okay.
So Stacy, if at any time you need to correct me, please do. Because what do I know? And, I almost titled this podcast, "What Do I Know?" Because that's like one of that's my go-to phrase. It's kind of a weaselly way to get out of conversation, really.
But it's also a good way for anyone to communicate with a lawyer, because it's expressing, that you need information.
Yeah.
And you're open to receiving it.
Yeah. And that's a key thing here. So give us your full title, and then give us what you are focused on and what you really want to accomplish and the types of people that you want to help.
So I practice solely family law in the city of Seattle. I have my own practice, and the areas that I include under the umbrella of family law are divorce, committed intimate relationships, which are non-married couples that are separating. Those cases can be necessary to file if parties own property together and or if they have children together. I do paternity cases, which needs a little bit of an explanation, because most people think that involves determining paternity.
Yeah, like, is that kid mine?
Right. And that's not the case. When you file a case, it has to fall under a certain category. Mm-hmm. And because unmarried couples don't file under divorce, they must file under paternity if they're trying to determine a parenting plan or custody order. I'm going to use the term parenting plan because that's what the Washington law is.
Okay.
But some people will think of it as a custody order. So
Right.
child
Okay,
custody.
I see.
So just to sort of clarify that.
Why don't they just come up with a new category for this?
For what?
For paternity.
Because it's just about establishing a residential schedule and child support. So yeah, I don't know why they don't, but I frankly don't think it matters.
Does that cause
There are a lot of cases where children's parents are unmarried, but there's no dispute as to who the father is.
Yeah.
So if for cases where there's a dispute about who the father is, I think there's much fewer of those. And so there's no reason to, in my opinion, to separate that out.
Gotcha.
I'm just explaining it so that listeners understand that when someone says paternity, it doesn't mean that its paternity is contested.
Yeah.
It just means that there needs to be, that there are children
Right.
of an unmarried couple.
Okay.
And the law in the state of Washington is to do what is in the best interest of the children.
Right. So guys out there, if you're going through the divorce and you get a paper that refers to paternity, don't freak out. It's probably the start of what you just mentioned.
Right. And it wouldn't be guys going through a divorce. It would be guys going through a breakup.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. Yes,
It would be unmarried guys going through a breakup.
Well, those guys too. Because I can imagine a guy getting this order. It's an order, correct?
No, it would be a summons and a petition.
Okay. So getting that and saying, hey, is she saying, is she questioning, or is there a question here? I can put myself in a guy's shoes and saying, hey, why am I getting this?
Well, typically the mandatory court form, which is the petition, says it puts that other party on notice. So it will say whether or not paternity is disputed.
Yeah.
Right on the document.
Okay.
So it is a little bit more straightforward than that.
Okay.
But I don't want to get too much in the weeds.
This is the problem with all these law shows. People binge them, 15 shows a weekend on a Saturday, and then all of a sudden they have a law degree.
Right.
And they understand how everything works.
Right. So other things that I do, mostly what I do is I do a lot of work with high conflict parenting cases. And I do some international law. I am part of the U.S. Department of State Hague Convention Attorney Network as a volunteer attorney. So I have worked on cases where children have been abducted and need to be returned back to the U.S. I would love to do more international law. I'm going to be doing a training for international mediation in
Very
family law
interesting.
cases. So that's coming up in about a month. So I do that. I'm very involved in the American Bar Association family law section, as well as the AFCC, which is the Association of Family and Conciliatory Courts, and that is an interdisciplinary organization of attorneys and parenting or mental health experts. So I work very closely with parenting evaluators because in high conflict parenting cases, you will need an evaluation
Right.
of the family and recommendations. And along with that, I'm currently co-authoring a book with a colleague who is a parenting evaluator, and we'll be publishing that later this year.
So you are very deeply involved with many aspects of your of family law, and it seems like all of these things that you're involved with just give you greater insight and greater ability to work with the clients that you have, here in Seattle.
I would agree with that, and I think I have a good understanding of mental health issues, personality disorders, and other aspects of human existence
Right.
that affect
Like a
parenting,
psychiatrist.
and and I have a great network of psychologists I can contact to talk about a case if I need to, or figure out if I do need a parenting evaluation, and if so, what are the main issues here.
No, that's great, because the more tools you have, the more tools you have and the more things you avoid pitfalls later on, or you can, if you see a certain client start to display certain traits, you can head them off, or, give solutions before that they turn into full-blown problems.
Right. And sometimes it means I change my approach to actually working with a particular client or working with an opposing party who's represented, by an attorney, most likely. But if it assists in negotiating.
Yeah. No, that's all that sounds, well, to me, it sounds like, oh my goodness, I think I would jump off of something a week into doing this. She's laughing.
I am laughing.
But I'm not very, I'm empathetic for about 5 minutes. Like, I have some friends that want to tell me their woes, and I hear them, but then, like, the second time they come around with the same thing, and then the third time they come around, then I'm like, you know what? I don't care anymore.
Well, this is why I make sure everybody goes to a counselor.
Yeah.
So they have a counselor during the process.
It's like, I don't think I could do what you do. So your focus, your primary focus is on high conflict cases.
Yes, I do regular high conflict cases,
Right.
but those are a lot of the cases that I see, and they are the cases that I actually enjoy because they do involve a lot of psychological issues usually, or some sort of disorder, and I find that very interesting.
Okay. And when you get one of these, like, tell me, how does that work? Like, what do you have, sort of a game plan that you work off of, or is each case really that different where you sort of have to look at it in a new way every single time?
Each case is very different. Some of the issues may be consistent from case to case, but sometimes I will take a case that another attorney has been working on and I will substitute in. Sometimes I am working on a case that's brand new and there are issues of great emergency, like they need an immediate restraining order. That is handled very differently than if I'm substituting in for another attorney.
Right.
I almost always get a parenting evaluation. I think that's very important in these high conflict cases because the goal is to serve the best interests of the children. So they are all different.
I wanted Stacy on the show because I went through just a silly divorce, and I'll just use the word silly because most of the things that had the process to me just seemed silly. So I went through this divorce where I think I made just lots of mistakes. I went through lots of mistakes of the lawyer I chose, how I communicated with him, what the expectation was. And I thought it would be great to talk to Stacy to sort of share what my mistakes were. And if someone out there is going through or is considering going through this process, having them create just this outline to avoid these mistakes, because mistakes are painful, they're expensive, and they just cause unnecessary stress on the whole family structure, especially if you have kids. And Stacy, I'll just start with saying the very first mistake I made was I basically picked the first lawyer that took an in-person meeting with me. I had called the couple and they sort of just blew me off. They just said, I can meet you in 2 weeks. And then the lawyer that I selected was the lawyer that said, come to my office this afternoon, which is sort of an indicator, right? If you can get a same day, maybe.
Well, not necessarily. I can be very, very busy, but if someone needs help and I have the time to, set aside an hour or two to meet with them, I try to do that because people are in great distress.
Right.
And if they've been served with a restraining order and there's a hearing in 5 days, they need to see someone.
Yeah, that's urgent.
So I can try to move things around to meet with people. I've met with people, off hours in the evenings, things like that, because it can be an area of law that has very emergent issues.
Right. So I don't think that I expressed major urgency when I went to go see him. I just basically said, I want a divorce. I need a lawyer. At the time, there wasn't any pending court dates. It was just me getting the ball rolling. But as I was going through, and you were very nice enough to provide this list of things that you talk to with your potential clients. And the very first one is identify your goals. What about the divorce? What about the parenting plan? What about child support? And as I was going back and thinking, I really don't think that my lawyer asked any of those questions. I mean, maybe I'm choosing to remember this in a incorrect way, but given the fact that my whole process was just, first of all, so long, and that nothing really happened, it seems like we didn't go into it with a game plan.
Mm-hmm.
So your suggestion to pick, well, I'll say that your communication with your lawyer to identify your goals, if that lawyer talks to you in that way, then he seems like they're going on the right path.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to, when you're meeting with an attorney, find out, what they know about the law. Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
have they explained the process to you? But I think a really good family law attorney understands that, and there's science to prove this, that, your frontal lobe shuts down when you're in very high emotional stress. And when that happens, people forget things, So I remind clients of things all of the time because they forget, or I'll follow it up with an email because they need to refer to it. I mean, they're extraordinarily stressed. It's like grief.
Yeah.
And so it's really the lawyer's job to say to the client, what is your goal? I mean, obviously your goal is to get divorced.
Right.
But getting there, how to make that happen, what you want for your kids, in terms of, a parenting plan. And then also I ask about, I always want to know the skeletons in the closet on all sides. I think that it gives clients credibility to come out of the gate saying, maybe I wasn't the best dad, when the kids were younger, but I've become more involved lately. And, it just gives you credibility to the court. But explaining that to clients initially and letting them know that, and not every attorney is the same. So not every attorney is going to take that approach like I do. But in my experience, the court will definitely find you more credible if you fall on your sword about any mistakes that you've made.
So you can't go in there and say, oh, I've been the perfect spouse. I've been the perfect parent.
Right.
I've been completely blindsided. This was, he or she is just selfish and only looking out for themselves and don't care about the family, where I've been here, the pillar of.
Right.
I mean, rarely are things that black and white.
Right.
So,
and if someone is accusing someone else of like having an anger problem or a drug and alcohol problem, I will tell my clients to go get the evaluation now.
yeah.
It doesn't matter because the court's going to order you to get one anyway. So if it comes back with a result that you don't like, at least then we can get in front of it and address, what maybe you need to start some therapy or something like that.
Right.
The other really big, most important thing to talk about with clients at the outset is the expense. And so many clients say, well, how much is it going to cost? It's impossible to determine that at the beginning because as attorneys, we bill by the hour.
Right.
And high conflict cases often take an extraordinary amount of
Sure.
time. So I don't know if the opposing party, even if my client doesn't want to run to court every 5 minutes, if the opposing party does, I have to respond to that.
Sure.
And sometimes it's not even the opposing party, it's the attorney they hired. Some attorneys are very litigious and they want to, what we call churn the case, which is create ways to make money by going
Yeah.
to court and things like that. So,
Like filing motions for everything.
yes, instead of having a conversation or trying to agree on it,
Yeah.
or doing early mediation, something like that.
So would you say that happens when someone that maybe has means hires a litigious attorney to overwhelm the spouse that maybe might not have that, maybe whatever, if whoever's the main earner?
that can happen, and we call that the other spouse, the underprivileged spouse. But oftentimes, if you do go to court on that, you can get attorney's fees up front from the other party.
Oh, okay.
Each party may be allowed to take $50,000 out of an account for their
Oh, I
attorney's
see.
fees.
Of a joint account.
Right.
I see.
So that's one way to get around that. But the expense with the high conflict is very hard to predict because
Right.
you don't know, and you also don't know what's going to happen in the future. There are things like, if anyone's ever seen the movie Kramer versus Kramer, and they have this big whoop-de-doo about the kid who fell off the thing at the park and he cut his lip, and so now the dad's a bad parent because he wasn't paying attention to the kid on the playground.
Yeah. It'll be ongoing.
And it was, it made them go to trial, and it was this big thing, so you don't know if something like that is going to happen in the future in the case that you have.
Yeah.
And you don't know how the other parent's going to react about it. Because most parents who are not disordered would say accidents happen.
Sure.
Kids fall off and split their lip or break a tooth or
Break a bone. That means they're playing.
Right. And this happens in families where they're intact and people are married,
Yeah.
right? And nobody's blaming the other parent or,
Right.
but it turns into very, it gives one party another reason to argue.
Sure. Which to me, it just seems like a waste of energy to have those types of arguments, because next week it could happen to the other parent. Like, they're not looking forward to, okay, there was an accident, but when they're with me, then are they being super vigilant, or are they saying can't leave your, like, are they putting them in a bubble?
Right.
It just so easily could happen. The shoe could be on the other foot so easily that to me, it just seems like, why are you doing this? And
I think that's another part of managing clients' expectations. Like, if I have a client who were to say, let's go after this person for that, or, I've had clients say, well, he's always 15 minutes late. And I'm like, a court's not going to micromanage your family life.
Right.
But, or I don't want to trade this day with him. And then I say, well, there might be a day when you want to trade a day.
Yeah.
So you got to think about that, because, someday things hopefully will settle down, but you
would hope.
Yeah.
So as I was looking through your list here, lots of really good information. And I guess I should ask, could this be something that we could share?
On my list?
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, we'll talk about it later, just to see if you're okay with it. But the one thing that I saw here that me and my personal experience would have probably been the best and would have helped this process along would be to get a counselor. It's like, even though I had decided I don't want to be married to this person anymore, like, they weren't going to change my mind about that. But if we had spoken to someone that maybe that person, the counselor, could have made us talk in a way where she didn't feel like I was abandoning the whole family, and that it really was just an incompatibility with me and her. And then if that counselor could have maybe helped her realize he doesn't hate you, he just doesn't see a future, but that doesn't mean that you being separated from him means that he is abandoning kids. Like, I think if a counselor had sat down and we had talked about that, and a third party had told her, listen, he just doesn't want to be married to you anymore, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't love the kids or all of these other things. I think that probably would have helped exponentially.
So when I say get a counselor, that's not what I meant, but that's a very good point.
Oh, okay.
So because by the time I see it,
Yeah.
they're already beyond that point, right?
Right.
They're getting ready to file. So what I say to my clients is they need themselves to get their own private counselor because it is a process that is like grief. It's very emotional. And by getting a counselor, you're going to be able to work with someone to manage those emotions. Hopefully someone will be able to assist you with setting boundaries around exchanges of children and things like that. But also, this is the way I think I really convince people to go into counseling is it's going to reduce their legal bill.
Yeah.
Because what happens is when I'm speaking with clients, I try to focus on the legal issues. And of course, the emotional issues are going to infiltrate. That's just part of this area of law.
Right.
But to the extent they can get outside help from a counselor and learn ways to have new behaviors, and because most people have fallen into these patterns with someone else that they've been with for a long time. And some of these patterns can be very unhealthy. So they have to, especially in domestic violence cases, they have to learn to stand up for themselves and things like that. So it's important that they're in counseling for that so that they're not spending money talking with me about those issues. It also helps them manage their emotions so that when I'm speaking with them, they can focus more on the legal issues and process them in a more linear way of thinking instead of with an emotional bend to it.
Yeah. So I guess where I was coming from it is, which is maybe sort of like 40% to what you're saying of getting that groundwork before you give someone a credit card, like putting that groundwork to say, this is going to happen. First of all, let's try to be civil. Let's make this as painless as possible because you can still have a positive outcome. And especially if there is kids, that positive outcome is, I don't care if in my case, the ex-wife ever speaks to me again. She just needs to, it would be a really good idea for her to separate herself from that and say, these kids still have a dad. He, for issues of he and I, that is no longer a relationship, but the relationship with these kids is going to be there for the rest of their lives. So if that groundwork is done prior to the starting of the actual legal process, it could help to reduce the expense, the stress, the time.
Possibly.
Yeah.
I mean, when people are in really high conflict,
I'm
it doesn't
sort of generalizing
work,
it to what I'm referring to is just, I want to say normal, like no, like let's say that there isn't any, alcoholism or drug addiction or any of these extreme factors. If it's just two people, if it's just I say the word normal with quotes. If it's just a regular family, getting this groundwork before could just let it just overall just be easier.
That's true, but I don't have a part in that because I'm not involved at that point.
Right. So I'll back up a little bit. I'll add that the suggestion to get a therapist or to talk to someone, if you're going to do it, is a great idea. Because even now I have friends that have started the process and they're just like any other married couple that are getting divorced. They hate each other. And one of them did go to therapy and it helped them later on. Like, even though they still got divorced, that marriage still ended, but their relationship with the kids is intact. Both of them were civil and not super angry. Like they didn't keep that anger. And then the other one, including myself, got divorced. Didn't talk to anybody to, therapy wise. And then ours was a complete disaster.
I mean, I'm a firm believer in therapy, and
Yeah.
I think that, again, it's going to reduce your legal bill, because otherwise you're going to be talking to your lawyer about all this. You're going to be amped up emotionally about these issues. And if you're working with a counselor, you're going to be able to better manage your emotions, which means you're going to be able to better focus on the legal issues when you're working with your lawyer.
Right. Well, we're going to go on to the next few things that you should consider as you're going through this process, but let's take a quick break and we'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Guy DeVillier. I'm the owner of That's Amore Italian Cafe on top of the Mount Baker neighborhood here in Seattle. Come see us for some great standard Italian fare and specials with a little Pacific Northwest flair. We're open every night for dinner from 5 to 9 during the week and 4 to 10 on the weekends. Make a reservation by visiting that'samoreseattle.com or give us a call at 206-322-3677.
And we're back. I just realized that the last segment, a lot of it was premised on the emotion that I felt and sort of still do of this whole process. And I sort of got distracted from the point of this show. Help me bring it back.
So that's a perfect example of why clients going through this process need to have a counselor, because you were focusing on what was troubling you emotionally, and you weren't focusing on what I was trying to explain about the legal process. So it happens all the time, and nobody should be faulted for that. Everybody's human. They're going through this process, but it's a perfect example of how you can be distracted by the emotion, and then you're not able to focus on the legal issues.
Yeah. I felt right into that. And I tried to tell myself I don't still talk about this emotionally, but of course that's not true. Mm-hmm. It's like and I'm doing it again. The reason that I do think it's so easy for me to get emotional about it is because there's a pretty good chance that emotion robbed me of a much better relationship with my kids than it should have had. So if there was less of that in there, all three of our lives would have been better, right? It's just better. So getting all of that, setting that aside for a little bit, where would you go next in this?
So initially, when I meet with someone, I try to give them all of the information about the process, the expectations. I listen to their story about their case. I try to assess the level of conflict and, then determine kind of what they might expect. Sometimes people come in having been served with a stack of papers and, they're very scared.
Yeah.
And even if you are the one serving the papers, maybe you're scared too.
Yeah.
It's also important for the attorney to understand that, these people are operating from a place of fear most of the time, and also just the change that's going to be happening in their lives. And, in parenting plans, it's unless one parent has proven to be completely unfit, the children are going to spend time with each parent. That's what the law is.
Right.
So, but I have people come in and say, and they're in tears, I'm going to lose my kids. you're not going to lose your kids. That's not how the law works unless you have a parenting evaluation or that says you're a danger to your children, or you have a CPS report that says you're a danger to your children. Even if you have issues with drugs and alcohol, or other addictions that are unhealthy, you could still have supervised visitation with your kids. So you would still be able to see them.
Right.
I mean, there are people that are in prison that see their kids.
Yeah.
So
that makes me angry.
Yeah.
Not angry. That makes me sad because, again, I might be emotional, talking about this in an emotional way, but I had to go to court multiple times to get visitation because I was threatened with police action if I came over. So I'm like, okay, there's no need for that. But obviously the person is super angry. So I had to go to lawyers, like, she's not letting me see it. I'm like, then he was like, okay, then we have to get court ordered visitation. And when I was in court for this, I remember hearing like the other lawyers and clients talking in the court hallway where mostly the mothers would say, I tell him to take them, but he doesn't want to. I'm doing this because he needs to. And it was the complete reverse of me. And I thought, holy cow. It's like, it's so funny that I'm here spending time and tons of money to try to get this access. And there are other people that will be given it and they don't want to take it.
Right. And, I've represented fathers who, very young men who have, they've dated someone very briefly and that person became pregnant, and they have had to fight very hard to have, a parenting plan that includes them and allows them to be a part of the child's life. So it's interesting because, I see both sides, and it can be heartbreaking to see these fathers who really want to be involved and compared to fathers who don't want to be involved.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it does become really expensive if the other person is unreasonably withholding contact or anything like that. So that is when I tell my clients that we need to have a parenting evaluation. And
what gets asked in a parenting evaluation?
So what a parenting evaluator does is they do a complete investigation and evaluation of the family. They meet with each parent. They sometimes they will do psych testing, or they will refer the clients out for drug and alcohol evaluations or psychosexual evaluations. There's all kinds of disorders that, if they detect that, they can have them sent out for evaluations. Ultimately, in the end, what they're going to be doing is making a recommendation for a parenting plan that is in the best interests of the children. In order to do so, their investigation has to be very thorough. So they meet with the parents, they observe the parents each parent with the children. If the children are old enough, they interview the children. They review records, medical records, daycare records, all of those things. And then they come up with a report of what their recommendation is. And that gives the court an independent and objective expert opinion as to what's in the best interest, because obviously the parents are jockeying for their own positions.
Right.
And so based on what you've told me about your situation, what I would have done was told you that you need to get a parenting evaluation.
And never had one.
It's expensive, but it's worth it because...
So who orders a parenting evaluation?
The court. So
okay.
What I would do is I would, on behalf of my client, ask the court to order a parenting evaluation.
Because I can see how if a parenting evaluation is suggested, I can see how one person or the other can say, oh, they're just going to hire someone who they think will give them the most favorable outcome.
Well, typically what happens is, one party might propose one person and the other party might propose a different person, and the court would then decide. In the state of Washington, it's a very small community. So generally people may agree on a parenting evaluator.
Oh, okay.
And if they don't agree, I've had courts say to me, you're going to pick, here are 4 people. I'm giving you 4 names and you're going to use whoever is first available.
Okay.
So then you don't really have a choice.
I see.
And they're an objective third party. So then they're appointed
Right.
and then.
And so you don't need a parenting plan to go through a divorce process from the get-go. Like if the court says you do need one, then you need one. But
You mean parenting evaluation?
Yes, I'm sorry, a parenting evaluation. So is it a given that you're going to have, that you're gonna need one?
Unless you can agree on a parenting plan.
So basically, if you're working with someone and you see that there are conflicts and that you're not agreeing, take a step back. Let's get this evaluation.
Right, because then it's basically an expert, right?
Yeah.
It's like if you're dividing property and you want to hire an appraiser to go get the value of it, right? So you might agree on an appraiser and you would get the value and then you would go from there. And generally courts will accept a parenting evaluation because they know that's the person who's been the eyes and the ears outside of the courthouse. The lawyers can't do it because we're representing our clients, and the clients can't do it because they're biased.
They're biased, yes. Yeah.
You need someone who is specialized in this kind of work and is a psychologist.
And I'll say again that mistake number 2 that I guess sort of goes along with mistake number 1, where I think I just chose the wrong attorney. I mean, he didn't bring any of these things up. He basically just said, you want to get a divorce, let's get you a divorce, A and B. Like there was no, or A to Z. There was no, let's do these things. These separate things only happened when, like the visitation, he didn't talk about it before then, but a problem came up and then he solved it. He wasn't really trying to be, I don't even say, this might be unfair, but he wasn't trying to be helpful. He was just trying to get it done, regardless really of the outcome, really of what the final result will be, other than a divorce. So if I could tell people that are going through this is super important. You need to have a lawyer that is going to be really communicative, that is going to ask these types of questions. Because if you don't, then you're going to not be, even though you might be divorced at the end, you're not going to be happy with what happens after. So this parenting evaluation, I think, would have saved us a lot. We just made so many mistakes.
And I say to people, it is expensive, but it can save you a lot of money in the long run.
Yeah.
And it's also, most people really are concerned with the best interests of their children. And that's what the law is in the state of Washington is, you're creating a parenting plan that is in the best interests of the children. So some people have a hard time thinking that because they want to get back at the other parent and use the children. But that's why a parenting evaluation is so important, because if you get a really good psychologist, they're going to figure that out.
So is a parenting plan going to say, let's just, not hypothetical here, let's just say that both parents are level-headed, but they still get an evaluation. What would be an ideal result from that evaluation for either of them?
Well, it depends on every case. It depends on where they live. Even here in the Seattle metro area, we have a lot of problems with transportation because there's so much traffic. So someone could say, well, I'm going to pick up the kids after daycare and I'm going to have my Wednesday night, 3 hours of dinner and hangout time with the kids. But they live in Bellevue, so they drive to Renton and then they get on 405 and go back up to Bellevue, and the kids have spent almost this whole time in the car.
Right.
And so that's not in the best interest of the kids. So all of those things have to be taken into consideration. The age of the children, developmental stages. Some kids are in the same family but very developmentally different. For example, a kid with autism who might have a sibling that does not have autism, they have different needs.
Sure.
And the younger sibling without autism needs frequent, shorter visits with a parent. And this is what the psychology the data has shown. The autistic child needs a very strict schedule. So you may need to have two different parenting plans in that type of a situation, because the autistic child who may be 10 may need a week on, week off.
Right.
But you're not going to do that with a 3-year-old. So, there's no one answer. And that's what is so interesting about family law is that even though, the law is not constantly changing in the ways that some other areas of law might be changing, the facts of each case are very important. And that really is what drives the rulings in cases.
Yeah.
And also because the best interests of the children is such a broad, concept, it gives judges a lot of latitude in what they will, how they will
each
rule.
Each parent has a different opinion on what the best interest is.
And so same with judges.
Yeah.
And the judges can, it's got to be within a spectrum, but it's a very big spectrum. It's not like a contract case where if someone violates the contract, it's kind of cut and dry and,
So do you see that maybe more issues come up after this evaluation? Are they recommendations or are they?
Yes, they
so
make
the recommendations and then the court decides.
Correct. The court doesn't have to accept the recommendations,
Okay.
but for the most part, they will accept all of them, or sometimes they accept most of them and they'll make some little change. One thing that's really helpful about also getting a parenting evaluation is that in the state of Washington, or in King County anyway, you're required to try alternative dispute resolution before going to trial. So you're required to go to mediation or a settlement conference. You have this parenting evaluation that gives you a lot of power in mediation and getting a case settled so that you don't have to go to trial. Because the parties are going to argue, the court's going to accept this, and the other party might say no, they won't, or they may come up with something creative in between what the recommendations are that both parents can live with.
Yeah.
And then they reach an agreed parenting plan. So it gives them information as to what a court's going to see and then how a court might rule on that.
Right.
So it really assists in the mediation process.
Do you ever see cases where one party just completely rejects what the evaluation recommends?
Yes.
And does so they just must be completely blinded by maybe emotion, maybe anger, or maybe just a little bit of denial of how they are.
Well, and again, a lot of those types of situations involve people who are disordered. And they have personality disorders or mental health disorders that impede their ability to understand and accept, the position. I mean, a parenting evaluation is everybody's warts are exposed. They talk about, your childhood and, your family and your upbringing, and because all of those things affect how you are as a parent. And we all have imperfections.
Yeah.
So someone who is self-aware would look at that and say, yeah, that's true. I am this way sometimes, or I am that way sometimes, or sometimes I'm not cooperative with this area of parenting, but for the most part, the cases I see, I don't see people that are like that. So sometimes I will bring in a separate parenting evaluator just on a consultation basis to talk to my client about the parenting evaluation to get them to accept it better. Because they can explain to them where their exposure is.
Right. Yeah. I mean, see, that's just, if I could go back and do things, I mean, everyone says that, right? I'm hindsight
Is 2020.
Thinking that I this could have been so much better and have avoided so much unnecessary conflict. So the evaluator recommends.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but one thing that I want to say to that is that, and I have to say this to my clients a lot too, is I think on some level you might be a little bit ignorant of what's going on with the other party.
You're right.
Because initially people can be very hopeful and let's see if things can work out, or it may start off very, very acrimonious and then they get to a point where they can start working together. But trying to get people to understand the impact of perhaps someone that has, a personality disorder or a mental health issue. I mean, I've worked with my own clients that way, and I've had to, like I said, bring in other experts to help them kind of understand where they're going with that. And I still don't think that particular client has an understanding.
Yeah.
And it's because, she's not capable of getting it.
Yeah, when that exists, I can understand how that can make things just even more. I mean, you're just starting off at such a, I don't want to say the word negative, but you're starting off at such a deficit to get to a good place. So in this process, so if you do get the evaluation, the court sees it, they get the recommendation, and then the two lawyers go start negotiating that. Do you see that cases where that evaluation is in place, they are shorter? Like a resolution is?
Generally speaking, yes.
Okay.
There are.
I didn't ask that question.
Well, generally speaking, most people will accept the parenting evaluation, and if they have a good lawyer that says, this is a good evaluation, this person is very qualified. In cases where they don't accept the parenting evaluation, they may hire their own expert to review that evaluation. They wouldn't do their own full-blown evaluation, but they would indicate areas where they didn't address certain issues that should have been addressed, things like that. And then that would be brought up to the court if they don't resolve it at mediation. So there definitely can be some ongoing conflict about the evaluation, but not. I would say for the most part, they're generally accepted.
What else would you add to that? In terms of, well, you had mentioned that it's good. It would be a good idea to have this evaluation before. It would be a good idea to get counseling before. Like, what is there a third or a fourth thing that you would say, do this prior to you hiring me or hiring an attorney?
I think, when I recommend the counseling throughout the entire case still ongoing. I have a former client I worked with 6 years ago, and she called me this week about an issue. And I asked her about, I'm very frank with my clients. It's not for everybody, but I want them to be prepared.
Right.
I don't want to tell them about that everything's going to be rosy and it's going to cost you $2,000, and because that's not how it is. And people need to know up front. So with this particular client, we worked very well together. And so I was going through this issue with her, and I said, first of all, you need to let all of this stuff go, and you need to get back into counseling. And she said, I'm still in counseling. I've been in counseling this whole time because she has a lot of anger at her ex.
Right.
But she's very self-aware, and she understands that, and she's working on it.
Yeah.
And she doesn't make it an issue with her kids. So
That's good.
yeah. So that's the counseling piece. That's to be going on throughout the whole case. In like I said, I do a lot of high conflict parenting cases, so that's why I'm focusing a lot on the parenting stuff, and that is where a lot of the dispute comes in. Certainly, people have disputes over property and valuation of property, but
what attracted you to high conflict cases?
Well, I started as a paralegal for a family law attorney, and then I went to I worked full time, went to law school at night, and then I did some other areas of law. I did some insurance defense work, and I did some malpractice of defense for attorney malpractice, and did a lot of family law cases with that. And it's a very tough area of law because there's a lot of criticism, and that's the highest, I think, besides criminal law, the highest area of bar complaints and malpractice suits and things like that. So
people blaming their attorneys.
Yes, which makes
I saw in your list is like, let's not blame the attorney.
Yeah, which, I mean, sometimes, the attorney might make a mistake, and it happens, right? I mean, malpractice does happen. But what I also try to explain to clients is, I can only work with the facts that you give me. So if you've had this conduct or this behavior in the past, there's consequences to that. I can't change that.
Right.
There's a lot of talk about acceptance, and then I'll say, work with your counselor on this.
Yeah.
That's like the counseling piece. And then again, the parenting piece of that is really super high conflict. What I like about it is that I think that I can be helpful in keeping families as intact as possible.
Yeah.
And I work with so many psychologists that with that help and those kinds of evaluations, people can try to move forward in a way that is less damaging. For example, I'm a member of an organization called AFCC, which stands for the Association of Family and Conciliatory Courts, and it's an interdisciplinary organization of lawyers and mental health providers. And, there's conferences and, all over the world,
right,
and presentations and things like that. And so once as a lawyer, if you're working in these high conflict cases, if you're keeping abreast of the changes in research and development of children and how conflict affects people and tools they can use to reduce conflict and things like that, it's very, very helpful.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of people will say, well, how many cases have you won? And I say, there's no winning in family law.
No.
There's just no winning. There's compromise, and there's doing what you can to keep the family as best intact when they are split up, because they're still family.
Yeah. And that's never going to change.
And it doesn't matter. You're not done with that other person when your kids are 18.
Right.
You're going to see them at graduations, at weddings, at funerals, at, all of these other kinds of events. And if you can maintain just, coexistence,
that's huge.
That's helpful. My parents divorced when I was in high school, and they were married for 24 years, and they spent every Christmas together since my brother got married and had kids, and they did it all for the grandkids, and we were always all together.
Yeah.
And a lot of people thought that was really weird.
It shouldn't be.
And you're right. It shouldn't be. And they coexisted fine.
Yeah.
It wasn't, they didn't sit down and chit chat with one another necessarily, but we would all sit at the same table and have dinner, and we were all doing it for the children.
Yeah. It shouldn't be weird. I've said that lots of times when I do come across these couples who have divorced and they have kids, but they're still civil to each other, where, someone will say, like, why? And I'm like, why are you saying this in a negative thing? It's like, this is the absolute best scenario for the kids.
Right. So for my nieces, all of the grandparents divorced and remarried. So they had 8 grandparents. And the 8 grandparents would all be there.
Yeah.
You know, they would spend time with all of them.
It's like
and
it can, if you have the ability to just take a step back and say, how can I really make this the best for the kids? You'll come to understand that you're going to double the kids' circle of people that are going to care for them
and love and support them. I
Yes.
saw a photo online once, and it was parents at a soccer game, and they were standing on the sidelines, and it said they were wearing these shirts, and one said dad, mom, stepdad, stepmom.
Yeah, see, that's great.
And they were all standing there together.
Like that should be normal.
And
Or
I
that
always
should
say
be ideal, not necessarily
I
normal.
always say a kid can never have too much support or too much love.
No, because
And each person can offer something different, right?
absolutely.
One person might be very intellectual, or one person might be very artsy, or one person might be, an emotional attachment, or
Expanding possibilities is not a bad idea.
exactly.
Yeah, that's what. Well, I mean, we could probably talk about this forever, but I sort of think that this is a good start, and I would love to have you back, because even though I did get sidetracked a bit, which I tend to do when you listen to the show, if you're going through this process, it sucks. First of all, it's gonna suck. It sucks. But doing some legwork, doing some foundation work before you start spending money, before there's a financial burden on it, and don't be mean.
Right.
I mean, understand that two people might not like each other anymore, but that does not mean that dislike carries over to kids or other family members. And think of it in a way that, okay, I can move on, which is just so hard to do, right? It's like,
Well, one thing I encourage people to do is to think about what their motivation is. What is your motivation behind this issue?
that's a great question.
Is it because you're mad at him because he had an affair and you now want to punish him for that forever? Well,
Right.
You're punishing the children because they still deserve to have a relationship with their father.
So if someone had asked me that, my motivation would just be, I just do not see a future.
Right.
I just do not see someone who.
But I'm talking a motivation behind a decision or a position that one might take that is unreasonable.
See, I'm going back to the emotion.
Yeah.
So it must be human nature.
Right. So when I was talking about the coffee cups earlier, it's not about the coffee cups.
Yeah.
I literally offered to go to IKEA and buy everybody coffee cups that day if they would stop arguing about the coffee cups. And coffee cups for everybody.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't about the coffee cups. So I said to my client, what is this about?
Right. Well, if we take those things into consideration, I think that we gave people a lot of good things to think about as they're starting this. Maybe things that just the fact that I so easily got wrapped up in the emotional, maybe someone can say, you know what, I'm doing the same thing. Let's just ignore what Carlos said based off of emotion, and then just listen to what Stacy said based off of the actual legal process and how to make it as painless as possible.
Right. Or that could just be enlightening to what does happen with people when they're going through the process. An example,
aware.
and then identifying it and seeing it, because you have to be a little outside of yourself to see that.
Right. Well, thank you so much for being on.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
I want to have you back.
Okay.
So maybe we can talk about a couple things in a more in-depth way, or
Sure.
You know what would be cool is if I started a legal segment on the show, like of current things that happen, like the Bezos divorce, or anything that happens like that.
Right.
That would be cool if you would want to talk about those types of things.
Sure, I would love it.
But thank you for being on.
Thanks
I greatly
again.
appreciate it. Thank you everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, share the show. I'm on iTunes, Stitcher, the website. I have a donate button on my website. Yeah. And I'm sorry, I should have done this too. Stacy, where can people find you?
So my website is www.heard-law.com, and you can find me there. And that's got all of my contact information, email, phone, all of that. So
I'll make sure to put that in everything that I post, put that information on there. So I'm assuming people can call you and get
they can schedule
consultations with you.
They can schedule a meeting with me. Yes.
And as you can see, she's 100 times better than the lawyer I had, based off of a few questions that she says that she asks her clients from the get-go. So I would definitely recommend you reach out and get information on this, and she cares, and she'll make it as best as possible. So we'll share that information. But again, thank you for listening. Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you.
And we'll see you later. Bye.